today I'm going to talk about part 2 of Psychic Attacks and the Path. If you haven't listened to part 1, I really don't have time to go into everything that I said last Sunday, but you can listen to it on our YouTube account. It's called WMEA World. And you can go to YouTube and you can get all the lectures, but particularly last Sunday's lecture. So here is just a little review. Particularly for our YouTube people, they may ask, what is the path? Well, we know that there are many paths to God, but the path that we travel is the path of the heart. It's the path of living ethics. It's a path that leads us back to Shambhala, where the will of God is known. And perhaps the most practical and important point is this, that this is a path that strongly adheres to the principles of beauty and goodness and righteousness and joy and freedom. The talk today, I'll be talking about inner attacks that occur to us as we travel this path together. Last week I said that a very high percentage of attacks come from our subconscious mind. So that's where I'm going to focus part 2 today, on the subconscious mind. Most of the subconscious mind is full of our own fabrications. Now, perhaps what is controversial here is that some people say there is no such thing as a subconscious mind. There is the subconscious, but there is no such thing as a subconscious mind. Well, that's fine. That's fine. We all have our approaches and our opinions and our experiences and our belief, and this happens to be mine, that we very definitely have a subconscious mind. We also have an amazing consciousness, and someday we'll spend a series of talks talking about what consciousness is. Because even as advanced as psychologists think that they are today, they still admit that they don't know what consciousness is. And yet the teaching, this is such a basic, rudimentary teaching to the ageless wisdom that it seems odd to us. But nonetheless, we have such in-depth information about the conscious mind and the superconscious mind that I think it's important for us to understand the subconscious and how it prevents us from moving forward as a soul. Whenever we are in a post-hypnotic state of mind, we collect a lot of post-hypnotic suggestions or hypnotic suggestions and add on them with our own imagination and our own fabrication. All of these things go into our subconscious mind. I was thinking about the talk earlier today and remembering many years ago I had read in the teaching what I thought was a curious statement. And that statement was, don't daydream. Because as children, most of us, when we were sitting in those little seats and those little desks, remember how little they were back then? And we would look out, in grade school, we'd look out the window and see the playground, and we'd begin to daydream about going out there and playing. And gosh, I did a lot of daydreaming back as a youngster. But now I understand, because daydreaming, per se, puts us in a state of mind where we are not conscious. So it is during that time post-hypnotic suggestions can go into the subconscious mind and later affect us in various ways. Isn't that interesting? I stated last Sunday that some of the emotional and mental elements that trigger hypnotic conditions are hatred and anger and fear, jealousy and greed. Whenever we are in these states, then everything around us, forms and sounds and words and colors, even motions, turn into post-hypnotic suggestions. Okay, now we're going to move into part 2. That was just a little review of last week. There are a number of ways our subconscious mind becomes activated, but there are 5 major ways. The first is through association. The second is through pressure, increasing pressure. The third is karma. Last Sunday, one of our remote viewers said, well, doesn't karma play a part in the expression of post-hypnotic ideas that are planted in the subconscious mind? Absolutely. I didn't answer the question because I knew it would be, we'd be talking about it today, but absolutely, karma is a way that activates, one of the ways that activates the contents of the subconscious mind. The teaching, this is interesting, and I'll talk more about it later. The teaching also will activate our subconscious mind, and then also being in the company of an advanced disciple or initiate. Sometimes the hypnotic events are so pressurized that they explode, and they lead the person into insanity, into confession, into renunciation, or into certain unexpected behaviors. Now, if you've had experience of this yourself, or you've had experience with your family members, group members, co-workers, now you're going to understand perhaps a little bit better of the triggers that take place that activate the contents of the subconscious mind, which gives us more understanding of what's going on. So, hypnotic events are so pressurized that they can lead a person into insanity and so forth. Karma, when the time is ripe, works through our subconscious mind and brings us into balance and equilibrium, or to meet and pay our debts. So you can see how this is a positive, action that will take place. That when the time is ripe, or when the time is right, karma works through our subconscious mind. Now the teaching, I found this very interesting and so true. The teaching increases the fire of the higher mind, right? Okay, it increases the fire of the higher mind to such a degree that it can break through the protective walls of the subconscious mind. And when this breakthrough occurs, it releases the elements that have been lying in our subconscious mind for centuries. So this is what the teaching can do when it increases the fire of our higher mind. This is why we can see some really weird behavior sometimes in people who really have engaged themselves in the teaching. Sometimes he can control these currents of the subconscious mind, but sometimes he becomes the victim of these currents. He feels he's in the rapids and he must either die or save himself. I know this seems dramatic and extreme, and it is, and there is a middle point where it's not quite so extreme, but I want to make a point so that we can understand these weird behaviors, either within ourselves, and sometimes it's very dramatic, or in those around and about us, to see those who are really sincerely, deeply engaged in the teaching, and this teaching is increasing the fire of our higher mind. If we have not undergone the process of purification and sublimation, then the teaching will add like another explosion, activating through breaking through the protective veil of the subconscious mind and activating these currents. When this happens, some of these people will disappear from the group, disappear from the teaching, even disappear from society and resign from their duties, their responsibilities, and basically they just become wanderers. This happened to a young wife and mother of 3 children. This happened many, many, many years ago when her 3 kids were the same age as my kids, and we had a wonderful time. We were both chaperones for the high school orchestra. And so we'd take our kids and their kids and cart them around the state for competition. And I just, I enjoyed her. We had a good time. We talked about the teaching. She talked to me about her prayers and the many mantras she's, experienced. And then she found meditation and began meditating 2 and 3 hours a day. And I had suggested that might be a little bit more than what, her body could handle. And she said, no, this is right. Well, what happened is that she ignited this, the fires of the higher mind, which broke through that protective veil of the subconscious. And she began to follow the directive of the subconscious mind. And in doing so, she became possessed. And her possessor told her to leave her family, leave her husband, leave her children, and go out into the world because Christ was on the way. And her job was to be a messenger to let everybody know. So this went on for a number of months. I didn't hear from her. Her family was very distraught. And then one day a policeman found her wandering on the streets, and they, put her in a hospital. And, that was the last I heard about her. So these things do happen. Some teachers, if they see the danger, can help such people pass through this kind of a dangerous bridge in relative safety. But if he does not notice the coming changes, the current takes the person away, then the currents that are taking the person away from the situation are in control. There's just nothing that can be done. A problem in today's society is that the traveler's ego is becoming so huge that he or she thinks she knows best and refuses to follow the advice of her teacher, arguing in such a way that her blindness to the subconscious influences causes her sometimes to turn against the teacher's advice. When this occurs, there is nothing else then that the teacher can do. This is why we need a teacher to protect us in the moments when the dams of the subconscious mind break down. Then we have the influence of disciples and initiates. Sometimes normal students of wisdom who come in direct contact with advanced disciples suddenly demonstrate very unusual behavior. The advanced disciple, because of his or her psychic energy, indirectly re-stimulated all that was good and bad within the subconscious mind of that person and led them into a desperate condition. But my premise is, if that teacher is aware of that fiery psychic energy that they carry, they will also control that energy. But it can't always happen. Won't always happen. But here's a story. This can especially happen with married couples or to the children of a normal disciple. Normal disciple. For example, one day a couple came to the teacher to discuss their troubles. The wife, who was a normal student of the wisdom teaching, had come in contact with an initiate and began taking classes with him. The result of this contact found her husband having Kundalini experiences, for, of course, they were sleeping together. Now, having activated prematurely that Kundalini energy, he began having extramarital affairs. So even though the teacher advised them how to carefully handle the situation in certain ways, it was too late, and the husband left the marriage for another woman. These things are very real, you know, they do happen. Here's another story. One day, a great teacher, a visitor, visited a spiritual group. A student in the group asked the visitor a very curious question. He asked the teacher, the visitor, "Are you turned off?" I know, isn't that interesting? And the teacher whispered, "Yes." Then he was led to the class where he stood almost like a statue and gave a very remarkable talk to everyone about how to build their future. Later, when the visitor departed, that student went to the group's teacher and asked the meaning of the question he had asked the visitor. He answered, "The teacher, the visitor who came, could hurt us drastically if he did not turn off the currents of psychic energy. This is why they live in remote places. He came here to talk, but he was able to turn his energies off." Anyway, so these are the 5 major means that can re-stimulate our subconscious mind. Of course, this does not mean that we must ignore the teaching and escape from our teachers, but we must take it easy and be cautious. See, like the young woman that found the teaching, the woman that was married and had the 3 children, you know, we must be cautious. And the teaching says this, like when you start meditation, start for 5 minutes, true meditation. And then maybe a few years later, 10 years. 10 years later, 10 minutes. 15 years later, 15 minutes. So it protects us. So we must take it easy and be cautious. If we are daring and courageous enough, we must not be afraid of our subconscious flood, but face it and control it and not lose our mind. The best way to get rid of it is to persist in the teaching. No matter what happens to you and around you, persist in the teaching. Remember, we are told that we must take the kingdom of God by violence. This is the spiritual life, and it is a battle. And from the beginning, we are going to prepare ourselves as warriors. So by keeping our balance, keeping our equilibrium, our purity, and our sacrificial service, and by following the wisdom of our inner guidance, we soon will pass the dangerous period. We will soon pass this dangerous period and help others to pass too when their time comes. Now, observation. Observation is the art of detachment from all those unconscious things that are going on within our nature. For example, we must learn how to watch this video recording of our subconscious mind. Of course, this is not easy, but gradually we are going to begin to see things that are automatically going on within us without our conscious participation. And it is here we must stop and watch. Okay, so our body, our emotions, our mind suddenly acts weird. I know you're going to say, well, that never has happened to me. I don't believe it. I It's part of the process. So what we must do is we must learn to separate our conscious mind and watch our mechanical reactions. We are 100 years advanced, and we are on the path of becoming a superior man or woman if we can conquer the hypnotic influences of our subconscious mind and put them under the process of sublimation so we can go on to transformation and transfiguration. Sometimes when we watch this video, these activities of our subconscious mind or our past fabrications, you'll be surprised how cleverly they are put together and how much of an effect they can have upon you if you do not observe them. Now, last Sunday I talked about some of the specifics of how this works. So again, I suggest, if you're interested, to watch that YouTube video. The elements of our subconscious mind can act as real enemies to us if we let them control our life. But once we learn how to observe them and control them and use them, then they become the source of our inspiration, and they will lead us to the science of knowing our true self. Isn't that interesting? It's like in Agni Yoga where there is the phrase tactica adversa. If you're going to engage in this exercise of tactica adversa, you have to be careful and use co-measurement to plan it all out. But when this takes place, then you understand that this video playback of what's going on in the subconscious mind can ultimately become a source of inspiration. There's a wonderful method we can use to protect ourselves when we are under attack by these post-hypnotic suggestions in our subconscious mind. It is by repeating some of the verses of the teaching. But, and this is the key here, this might surprise some of you, do not analyze the words that you are saying. And this is why the subconscious elements cannot fall under the power of analysis in general. And if they do, they gain strength and power because of our attention. So this is why we are told, this is questions that people who are new to meditation ask, can I meditate on my problems? Right? This is one of the questions. And the answer is no. No, this is why, is because they will gain strength. These problems will give strength. This is why we don't meditate on the chakras. Meditating on the chakras will stimulate everything stored in those chakras, which correspond to the brain, the centers in the brain. So there's a keen science going on here. This is so simple, but stay on the positive road. The more we focus on the light then illumines the darkness in a very safe way. So don't start meditating on the problems, but take the verses of the teaching, which are verses of the Master, which carry a beautiful vibration, a very high resonance. It creates a rhythm that corresponds to not only our heart, but puts us in a magnetic rapport with the cosmic magnet. It's much more powerful, than the darkness. When attacks come to our life, we must answer them with the words of Christ, with the words of the ageless wisdom. I often answer my own attackers with the words of Master Moria. or the words of the Bhagavad Gita. The words of the ageless wisdom stand as principles and powers against all kinds of attacks if they are used with strong faith and obedience. This is an exercise. It's a wonderful exercise, and I like to do this every summer. Well, I used to do it every summer when I had time, which is to collect from the teaching those verses and words that remind us of fearlessness. So these are 7 points that if you want to do this over time, collect what the teaching has to say about fearlessness, about unity and love, about forgiveness, about service. And then that will uplift us, words that will uplift us from depression, that urge us into cooperation, and that will make us daring and courageous and inclusive, and so on. Use these collected words or verses then, on the right occasion. When you see that video tape playing and you're observing it in yourself, you will have the words of the teaching. And I particularly like Agni Yoga, so I'll go into, now we have this wonderful search engine. It's really a nice search program on the Agni Yoga website. And you can just put in fearlessness or fear. If you put in fear, you'll get everything that has FEAR plus lessness, And there you have it right there. But my own druthers is do this by hand. Or if you're going to do the search, of fearlessness or of love and unity, then print it out and then write it. There's just something magical. First of all, it slows you down, slows your mind down, and it's a form of meditation to start writing, what the Master has to say, about these subjects. In this process, we begin to purify and then sublimate the content of the subconscious mind. Such collected principles and sayings will go into our superconscious mind, and at the right time they will sound their power and protect us. The point is this: whenever we are under post-hypnotic suggestions, we need someone to help us so that we don't harm ourselves or others, or to be trapped in various problems because our consciousness is asleep. And where I don't have time to go into it, when our consciousness is asleep is like daydreaming. And for those of you that know about the mental unit in the mental body, what is happening at this point is the mental unit is turned off. The mental unit is there to protect us. It's like a filter system. But when we're in a daydream state of consciousness, let's say, or unconsciousness, that's when these post-hypnotic and hypnotic suggestions go into the subconscious mind. So we don't want our consciousness to be asleep. So this is why, the point being made here is that if we have this collection of wisdom and the power of the energy of the words of the Master, and we're putting this frequency in the higher mind, then we have an automatic built-in protection that protects us when that videotape begins to play itself back. Okay? And then it's erased, no longer controlling our actions. If there is no one who can help us or is around us, if we are wise and quick enough, then you can say a mantra and warn yourself. For example, if you're trying to quit drinking and you see a bottle before you and you take the bottle and say, "Lord, lead me not into temptation," or some other mantra you know. See how simple that is? You know, you say that, "Lead me not into temptation." And it doesn't have to be quite so dramatic as, you know, drugs or alcohol. It can just be a repetitive thought of fear. You know, just bring a short verse, you know, into your conscious mind, and it will eradicate that fear. While we are under post-hypnotic suggestions, our conscious mind does not operate. And we need somebody to guide us until we are out of it. Mantras can help us when we do not have a wise friend close by. In repeating the mantra, we can make a contact with our higher self and put it into action to guide our conduct. I think you'll find this point interesting. The subconscious mind does not work with logic. Do you find that interesting? It does not work with logic. It has, now this is the point, it has no space-time concept. Any person, to the subconscious mind, any person is every person. Any person is every person. It has no space-time concept. For it, there is no low or high, but only mechanical discharges of the subconscious elements. It is dangerous to work on the subconscious mind. Why is that? You pull out one thread and you say, "I found the cause of this disturbance. Great, I've got it." But later, you know what's coming, later you realize that one thread is tied to 1,000 threads. And when you pull them out, you see that you're in a hornet's nest. So once the subconscious mind is agitated, the person goes crazy because he alternately tries to fulfill the contradictory demands, say, of the suggestion. You see in his behavior a lack of continuity. You see it in constant change, a lack of stability and direction, and this is what the subconscious mind does. Now, I'll just share a little idea to think about, and maybe someday later we can talk and discuss it a little bit more in depth. But when this subconscious mind, when our subconscious mind is in control, it also affects glamours, particularly glamours in Maya. Now, imagine our whole auric envelope being charged with the content of our glamours, being charged with the content of Maya, being charged with our temptations and so forth. This is an automatic magnet. Then our auric envelope, let's call it, is a magnet, automatic magnet that begins to attract entities into our being and starts to control us. Now this will happen with, you know, a normal human being, but even more so with a disciple or an initiate, because their system is so refined. And even though we like to think that our subconscious mind is completely clean, it still brings in the dust and debris of others. So the subconscious mind of others can influence our subconscious mind. How does that happen? If we're really tired. If you're really tired, don't get tired. You know, take a power nap. Anyway, what happens then is that we open ourselves up to obsession. And then later that can lead to something more serious. So, I strongly advocate for those who are traveling this path of the heart, this path back to Shambhala, stay away from alcohol, stay away from drugs. Why engage in alcohol and drugs, pot and so forth, when we are, on the other hand, trying to help our soul evolve and move ahead? Okay, I'll get off my wagon here. Once the subconscious mind is agitated, I'm repeating myself here, the person goes crazy because he tries to fulfill the contradictory demands of the suggestion. There are other steps that we can take to avoid being the slave of our subconscious mind. One of them is to see our negative attitudes and change them immediately. So when, for example, I'm ready to curse you, you instead do just the opposite. I make a strong effort to bless you, and that's not always so easy. When I'm ready to hit you, I hug you. When I'm ready to call you on the telephone or write you using really ugly language, I use my telephone or Skype to make you happy and to write a pleasant email. The next step is to work on our virtues and try not to allow our vices to take over. I wrote down here, and allow your voices to take over. Okay. Think about that. Reading books of the ageless wisdom gives us plenty of support to live a conscious life, or at least a life that is controlled by higher standards. It is also good to have friends who are sincere and loving and who dare to point out our weaknesses with a gentle way, with loving understanding, and without hurting our feelings. But the most practical method is to build your ideal image every day, to make this ideal image better and better, and then try to actualize it life after life. So in conclusion, attacks are intended to first violate our freedom, second, misdirect our will, third, to obsess us, and fourth, to possess us. Some of our video recordings not only exercise pressure on us through post-hypnotic suggestions, but they also provide astral corpses, vehicles for astral corpses, astral entities, or those entities that are earthbound. When our own thought forms serve as bodies to such forces, then we put ourselves in a very dangerous situation. We invite lower and dangerous entities to obsess and possess us through the vehicles that we build, through our thoughts and emotions, and through our imagination. Sometimes our dead friends or parents come to our dreams and give us various advices or warnings. This is another important point in which we must be watchful. Once a person is gone, they've passed on, he cannot come in contact with the physical world, except if he is trapped in the etheric domain. The only way to communicate with those who have passed is to develop the ability to travel to the higher worlds. And even then, you're going to experience a ring past not, where you cannot go. But if you have the consciousness, and there is a magnet between you and your parents, or you and your beloved friends, then that magnet can bring the two of you together. But it depends on where your level of illumination is. This happens after we build our anticorona. It is probable that the corpses of our friends and parents can be attracted to our subconscious thoughts and emotions. So we must, I know this is really heavy, but I wanted to throw it in, just for you to consider. Once they are in the network of our subconscious elements, these elements reactivate the recordings of the corpse and make them communicate with our etheric brain during sleep. So let me close with this. Instead of trying to contact our beloved ones through mediums, you can please them by greeting them and receiving their blessing if you do philanthropic work in their name. For example, publish books dedicated to them. And I know some of you are doing this. In that first page, of your book, I dedicate this book to, oftentimes, Master M, or your teacher. Give a yearly dinner to poor people in their name. Send poor children to college in their name. Help needy families in their name. Help orphans and widows financially in their name. You can also build a library for your departed ones. Anything done in gratitude for the departed ones is never lost, but brings in their blessing. Isn't that nice? Okay.